Chapter 29 has three parts. One is the civil rights movement. The second is liberal domestic and foreign policy with John F. Kennedy and Lyndon B. Johnson. And the third is the Vietnam War and its effect on America. The civil rights movement started in really the 1950s, but really blossomed in the 1960s. The images that you see are the images of Jim Crow, of the South, in the post-war decades. Colored and white, a black world and a white world. The civil rights movement has a number of important ideas. The first is that it's a people-led movement. It's done by people at the bottom. Many people often think that it's all about Martin Luther King and Malcolm X. It's not just about them. It's about people that fight for a cause. It's nonviolent at the beginning of the 60s, and it turns into more extremism later because civil rights activists split. Some are peaceful and some say that the movement isn't going fast enough or quickly enough to achieve change. It also lays the groundwork for many other rights movements of the time, such as feminism, Native American rights, Mexican American rights, farm workers. So the civil rights movement is something that leads to many civil rights movements for different people groups, and it's still going on. In the 60s, there's two distinct eras. You have President John F. Kennedy, and the emphasis is simply getting voting rights to make sure that blacks are not discriminated against federally, and a federal end to segregation to eliminate Jim Crow laws. Whereas in President Johnson's time, after Kennedy is assassinated, the emphasis is going to be on significantly more powerful legislation to correct racial injustices. It starts out nonviolently with the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee in the early 60s with sit-ins. And what they do is they go to stores and lunch counters and they will sit there, and the whole strategy is to get arrested, gain notoriety because the press and the media will be there to film it and to draw attention to the inequities in the system. And they're very successful in drawing awareness. Another significant moment in the civil rights movement is the Freedom Rides, when the whole point is to go down into the South. After seeing some of these sit-ins, white students up in universities up in the north here go down into the South and try to desegregate bus stations. As you can tell, they're not met with a lot of loving arms. This tends to be much of the violence that goes against civil rights workers, both white and black. But as time goes on, the pressure is building for John F. Kennedy to do something. Now, he was very worried about the political repercussions of doing something about civil rights, because civil rights could basically split the Democratic Party, and this could be a very, very bad thing. The South is full of conservative Democrats who voted for Kennedy, and if he supports civil rights and civil rights legislation, we have a serious problem. Could Kennedy and the Democrats be reelected again? And that is what Kennedy had to do in order to deal with that. 1963 is a pretty good watershed year in terms of civil rights, and it's most notably in the effort to end segregation in Birmingham, Alabama in March and April of that year. And basically, this is the time when African Americans march on Birmingham to desegregate the city. And you can see the response of the police officers, very violent. And what's even more notable about this is that as I was saying, is that children ages 6 to 16 are enlisted by Dr. King here. As you can see, Dr. King gets jailed. And they are sent into the city, and this response by the police is broadcast on television. And in the summer of 1963, the sentiment against the segregation in the South hits a high note, and prompting President Kennedy in June of that year to issue a civil rights piece of legislation to deal with this problem and to end segregation. And by August of 1963, Dr. King, as well as nearly 250,000 people, march on Washington, D.C. to urge Congress to pass a civil rights bill. Of course, John F. Kennedy will not see that civil rights bill passed, as he is killed on November 22nd, 1963. But President Johnson takes over, and President Johnson's big contributions to the civil rights movement are, well, a couple things. Number one, the Civil Rights Act of 1964, in which the goal is to desegregate America. No more separate facilities, no more separate this and separate that. Johnson is going to make sure that things are desegregated. One of the reasons he's able to pass this law is because public sentiment is pretty high in favor of John F. Kennedy, because people loved Kennedy immensely, and his assassination really shocked America. And not only that, the images on television, I think, galvanized Northern opinion against some of the things that were happening in the South. This also set up something called the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, which was to stop racial discrimination in hiring and in jobs. And one of the interesting things is that the long-term effect is by 1972, nearly half of African American children were now attending integrated schools for the first time. So really, America is beginning to see a change here. In the second part of the lecture, for chapters 29 and 30, we will explore more legislation and go more in depth about some of the issues in the civil rights movement.